All right, so welcome everyone. And with me today is Michael Calabrese. He's director at New America. And Michael, you're going to get a second chance at presenting. You were at the Dynamic Spectrum Alliance's Global Summit in Rio. We had a small hiccup with the recording on site in Rio, which is why we're super grateful that you've come back and taking the time to give us a new rendition of this important topic. So, Michael, I'm going to bring up your slide set and let you present on solving the spectrum crunch. Go ahead, Michael, and hopefully enjoy.
Yeah, thank you, Klaus. Um, yeah, I am. Yeah, Michael Calabrese, director of wireless feature at New America, and yeah, I'm summarizing a new report that DSA released at the summit, solving the spectrum crunch, dynamic dynamic spectrum management systems. So, first, a bit about the motivation for automated spectrum coordination systems, and that is that a robust 5G ecosystem must include more than mobile carrier networks. A high capacity, ubiquitous, and affordable 5G ecosystem increasingly depends on next generation Wi Fi and other uh, shared spectrum technologies, licensed and unlicensed, enterprise and venues, fixed and mobile, indoors and outdoors. All wireless technologies will need to be part of the solution. Dynamic sharing enabled by databases is unlocking spectrum capacity. This yields a substantial increase in available spectrum to meet surging demand. And of course, it starts with the protection of incumbents. But first, I wanted to just kind of dispel a bit um, what critics, claim is, that this is some sort of radical departure for telecom policy, and that it's, sort of untried and unproven. And what I think we have to take a step back and realize that uh, telecom database management is nothing new. In fact, it's been at the middle of our advances over the years. So telephones themselves began with manual switchboard operators and evolved to signaling networks relying on automated databases adopted globally, and then automated phone number portability and forward routing adopted in the US and the UK in the late 90s, now global. And of course, internet routing relies on DNS databases. So the use of databases to coordinate and automate spectrum sharing is likewise nothing new. The steps are the same as in a manual coordination process. We just add inputs and algorithms. So what is new is the technology to automate the sharing process and thereby lower the costs, protect incumbents with greater certainty, and coordinate users and devices in near real time. This yields benefits for industry stakeholders, consumers, and regulators. Here's a very simple schematic, um, which you'll see versions of a few times. Um, Over on the right, you have the inputs, and on the left, other optional inputs, and it all goes into the database. So here are the core functions of a DSMS. First, to protect incumbent licensees from interference. It's the old, Hippocratic oath: do no harm. Um, Also, to provide authoritative and virtually real-time decisions on requests to transmit or assign usage rights, to enforce the use of authorized devices only, and to monitor spectrum assignments and, in some cases, actual usage. DSMS has uh, great benefits for industry stakeholders, consumers, and the economy. First, of course, it expands spectrum capacity and efficiency. This promotes more intensive use of the public resource. It enables direct spectrum access for localized uses, increasingly for IoT and enterprise networks, campuses, venues, schoolrooms, by an increasingly diverse range of users. And it lowers the cost of connectivity for users and consumers more broadly. There are also benefits to regulators. An automated spectrum coordination system is an automated enforcement tool that ensures consistent protection of incumbent licensees, including kill switch capability, if that's appropriate. AFCs can monitor spectrum use and help enforce the rules concerning equipment certifications, licensing, and even fee requirements. Coordination can be delegated while the national regulator retains authority. This gives regulators more control over band sharing, including the flexibility to change allocations without making equipment or infrastructure obsolete, as well as the flexibility to establish and later update sharing parameters such as power levels or some frequencies, not others. And there's even the option for cost recovery, not only the fee to pay for the coordination itself, but any other NRA regulatory fee. So let's look next at the evolution of spectrum management systems. Spectrum coordination has evolved from manual to database assisted 2 or 3 decades ago, to automated to dynamic, adding automation and propagation modeling to static licensing data. So on the right is an example of database assisted coordination in the 70, 80, 90 gigahertz band in the US. So this is not automated, but in this band is open to any registered licensee coordinating in a new fixed link in these higher bands. And what they need to do is to use a portal to put in the link, which checks with a government database to make sure that it's not in conflict with any federal use of the band. And that's hence the green light, yellow light, red light system, because the private database, most typically run by CommScope, is connected to the government database. Much better known globally and adopted globally is the TV whitespace database that allows unlicensed use of vacant TV channels for what was at the time, back in 2010 in the US, called super Wi-Fi. As you can see in the simplified schematic, and this one is from Ofcom's database, the sort of pink colored hexagons are the inputs. So TV and microphone locations, which of course are fixed, the modeling data and the agency's rules are run through the algorithms, and in response to a request, the channels that are vacant in a particular location are identified for use. And of course, the channel availability can change depending on what part of the country you are in, whether microphones have an event to cover, or any number of things. And devices must check in at least once a day in the US. The big breakthrough, in my opinion, was in 2015 when the US adopted a dynamic 3-tier spectrum coordination in the Citizens Broadband Radio Service. And this is 3-tier for really a compelling reason. First, the main incumbent in the band is US Navy radar. So this is a high-powered radar, but of course it's only operating along the coast, but it's also on the move. The second tier, using actually 70 megahertz of the band that were auctioned are priority access licenses. And these were auctioned in 2020 by county across the US. And then the third tier is general authorized access, which it's akin to unlicensed, but it's really lightly licensed. GAA users can operate opportunistically across the entire band on a use it or share it basis. That means that even if someone has bought up to the maximum of 4 priority licenses, 40 megahertz, if they haven't deployed in an area, a GAA user can make use of that. And many, school districts and ports, and even other PAL licensees that want to add capacity are using GAA. And GAA, again, spans over the entire 150 megahertz under common technical rules. Here's a schematic. Again, in the pink hexagons are inputs to the spectrum access system, the SAS. And what's interesting here, and makes this the most complex database coordination to date, is the fact, as I mentioned, that Navy ships are, they're sailing. And so they turn their radar off and on depending on how close to the coast, and they're moving. So the military insisted that there be some way to detect their high power radar and relay that information to the spectrum access system so that users could be moved to a different channel if there was a conflict. And so there is an environmental sensing capability, basically sensors up and down the coast that relay that information to the spectrum access system. Sensing becomes another input into ecosystem awareness. So let's look forward now to the emerging scenarios for dynamic spectrum coordination, particularly in the 6 gigahertz band, which is really exciting. So 6 gigahertz, which has now been adopted, has been authorized for license exempt use as an underlay in more than 50 countries worldwide, anywhere between 500 megahertz at the bottom of the band to all 1200 megahertz in most of the Americas. One thing that's often not understood is that there are 3 different license exempt operating classes. Every country has authorized low power indoor only use, LPI, as well as client to client to connect to those APs indoors. Then most countries have also adopted very low power, which is about 1/10 of standard power to connect peripherals such as glasses, headphones, and other wearables to your smartphone or laptop or whatever your AP is. And then coming on and very important is standard power use, both indoors and outdoors. But because of the nature of the incumbents, which in almost every country are high power fixed microwave links, this needs to be geographically coordinated by an automated frequency coordination system. So far, 2 countries, the US and Canada, have fully adopted this. And US and Canada are expected to certify multiple automated frequency coordination system operators this year. Similar authorizations are pending in Brazil, South Korea, and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. The channel plan here gives you an idea of just how, powerful this is for next generation Wi-Fi. In the US, the Uni 5 and Uni 7 bands, that's what the FCC calls them, 850 megahertz, will be available not just for LPI, but for standard power and outdoor use. In Canada, it's even better since that middle segment will also be available. 950 megahertz of contiguous standard power Wi-Fi for Wi-Fi 6E and Wi-Fi 7 shortly. The European Union is actively studying AFC coordinated RLANs at standard power. There's an ECC working group already in progress, due to report in about a year. They're only studying at this moment the lower 500 megahertz because that's what's been authorized for license exempt use in the EU until, pending, of course, the results of the World Radio Conference this fall. So here's how an AFC works in 6 gigahertz. The certified access points, first of all, it's a key point that a device cannot be certified in a band unless it's capable of knowing its geolocation. So the APs must report their location to the AFC that they are registered with. Constellations of APs can be under the control of a remote management system. APs must request a list of available channels every 24 hours. And the AFC then sends each AP a list of permissible operating frequencies and the power limits available for each frequency at that location. The AP, or the network controller, as you can see on the right, chooses the operating channels that works best and configures APs under its control. Unlike in CBRS, where the SASs need to coordinate with each other to kind of manage aggregate interference, in the 6 gigahertz band, the relationship between the AFC and the AP seeking permission to transmit is one-on-one, because all that matters is whether you are in the protection zone of a fixed link or not. And here's the system architecture. Once again, very similar, actually more similar to TV white space, because it's a fairly simplified process, since every incumbent is fixed and rarely changes. And the information is simply, in the US, is simply downloaded from, refreshed once a day from the FCC's universal licensing system. The FCC is in the final stages of approving multiple operators. It's conditionally approved 13 different operators. Some will compete, others will focus on industry segments, since some were trade associations like the Wi-Fi Alliance. Next steps, the FCC will define the process and metrics for first lab testing in a controlled environment, and that's expected to begin within the next 6 weeks or so. And then field testing, a demonstration project with a public trial where incumbents can, check it out and complain if they don't think it's working properly. And then commercial operation will follow final FCC certification. The hope is during the third quarter. Another new trend that can be facilitated with an AFC in the future is local shared access licenses. This began in the UK, and now 14 countries worldwide are opening parts of the 3.7 to 4.2 gigahertz C-band for local shared access licenses, initially relying on manual coordination by the regulator. You can see the 14 countries here that I know about. And this began, as I said, with Ofcom in 2019, which authorized 2 categories of local shared licenses. So it's quite a creative system. They have low power shared access license, where the AP is limited to 24 dBm, and the devices must be within 50 meters, or medium power, which simply limits the power of the database, of the base station to 42 dBm. So far, Ofcom, as of December, had approved 1,600 licenses, and they are discussing developing a database to streamline and this process, which, as I said earlier, makes it easier and faster and lower cost, especially for the regulator who's spending resources doing this. DSMS is also being considered to coordinate sharing for fixed wireless access in several different upper mid bands that are very underutilized. So in the US is considering this in unused upper mid-band spectrum for point-to-point and or point-to-multipoint. You can see in the schematic there, since fixed wireless is directional, DSMS can coordinate in bands where mobile cannot exist, because it's not directional, and the handheld devices can be walked right up to an incumbent receiver. This is being looked at in the 12.2 to 12.7 gigahertz band, which is a LEO NGSO satellite band for downlink. The band just above that, which is very likely used for broadcast auxiliary, and the 10 gigahertz band, which is military radar operations. And they might be able to share, and if not, we're hoping they will at least allow an unlicensed underlay indoors. The final one I have here is up in the millimeter wave, kind of showing that this can be low, medium, or high. Another US band has already been authorized for co-primary sharing between fixed wireless access and government uses, currently the military and NASA, the American Space Agency. The challenge is accommodating future expansion of federal agency use, and the agencies, the FCC and the administration, are still wrangling over whether it will be truly co-primary, or rather the government gets some super primary status. But the FCC has authorized shared commercial access based on shared access licenses, which it is already dispensing on an experimental basis. So SAL rules and the database are TBD. Finally, I want to mention some innovations in dynamic spectrum management that will only make this tool more powerful in the future. Spectrum efficiency, interference protection, more diverse localized access, and quality of service will be greatly enhanced as DSM systems first, and this is probably most important, incorporate real-world propagation modeling and GIS data. That is, models that show the terrain, the clutter, building heights, and materials. That all has an enormous difference on the degree of sharing. And I should note that I know in the US, the AFCs in 6 gigahertz will be able to take this into account far more so than in earlier points of the evolution of databases. A second thing is real-time spectrum sensing data. That is kind of been a mixed result in CBRS, but the crowdsourcing of spectrum usage is a promising thing possibly for the future. An alternative to sensing is incumbent informing capability. And currently the US government is working on that. I'll show that quickly next. Database operators are innovating value-added services, such as optimizing the available bandwidth or coordinating among co-equal users. And then there's the potential to integrate AI and blockchain technology into DSMS. An example is in France, where the regulator has already done a successful trial using blockchain to coordinate PMSE, microphone use in an area, and is planning to expand the scope of that at the Paris Olympics. Here, just really quickly, is this incumbent informing capability, which sort of embraces this notion of a mutual obligation by spectrum users to facilitate sharing, including incumbents. Here, the Biden administration has asked Congress for funding to establish a government-side DSMS capability to facilitate sharing among federal users as well as with the private sector. And it's passed already one house of Congress. The DSA has some policy recommendations. I don't want to dwell on these, but I think it's important kind of as emerging best practices to consider adopting a DSMS approach in any underutilized band that where you can get much greater use, where in other words the juice is worth the squeeze. NRA should authorize the simplest possible DSMS solution. That is, don't require sensing as belts and suspenders as we did in CBRS if it's not absolutely necessary, because it adds costs and it overprotects false positives. The NRA should adopt clear rules, but should not prescribe particular technologies. In fact, that leads to the next one, which is that it's best to convene an industry multi-stakeholder process to develop and assist DSMS implementation. That also removes much of the burden at the technical level from the regulator. And it's worked reasonably well, even though it slows things down to some degree. Use the most granular and real-world GIS data. And of course, it's cost-effective to leverage existing DSMS systems and operators for multiple bands, or if in smaller countries, just to get going with one that's already existing. And in that respect, the 6 gigahertz band has seen a great innovation, the Open AFC, which is an open source AFC developed by several companies, which will be available for any country, any regulator or new operator to customize to the rules of that country. So that's it, Klaus, and I felt a little less time pressure without the live audience, so I hope that wasn't too long.
Exactly.